The train whistle screamed across the frozen Montana plain, like a woman giving birth to sorrow itself. Clara Hayes stepped down onto the icy platform, with nothing but the dress on her back. Threadbare calico that had once been blue, now the color of old bruises. The hem was black with cold dust and despair. Her shoes were held together by twine and prayer. In her arms she clutched a small bundle, wrapped in a shawl that had belonged to her dead mother. The bundle moved and let out a thin, hungry cry every head at the Little Horn Depot turned. Then every head turned away, ashamed to look at such ruin. Except one, Elias Thorne stood waiting beside his black gelding, hat in hand, silver hair catching the weak winter sun. He had paid for a bride who looked like the photographs, soft curls, hopeful smile, Sunday dress. Instead, here was a scarecrow of a woman with hollow cheeks and eyes that had forgotten how to dream, people whispered behind their gloves. That's Thorne's mail order girl. Lord, he could buy a dozen beauties. Why would he send her back? Put her on the next train east. Elias heard every word. He had built the largest ranch in 3 territories by listening to what wasn't said. Right now the wind was saying, this woman has already been thrown away once. Don't be the second man to do it. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Western Tales of Frontier, and leave a like and comment if this story touches your heart. Clara stood shivering, clutching the baby tighter. She had spent her last coin on the ticket west, after her husband drank himself dead and the bank took the farm. The marriage advertisement had promised safety, a home kindness. She had written back with shaking fingers, I can cook clean. Men garden, I will work hard. I have a daughter, Rose. Age 2, please. She had not written, I am afraid, every single day. Elias walked forward. His boots crunched on the frozen gravel like breaking bones. He stopped 2 paces from her. Up close she smelled of coal, smoke and milk and terror. Ma'am, he said quietly. You, Clara Hayes, her voice came out a cracked whisper. Yes, sir. I'm sorry I'm not what you paid for. The baby whimpered again. Clara turned her body to shield the child from the wind, and Elias saw the way her shoulders curved around that little life, like wings something in his chest. Something that had been stone since his Ellen died birthing their stillborn son 10 years ago. Cracked clean open, he took off his long, sheepskin coat and draped it over Clara's shoulders. It swallowed her and the baby both. My truck's warm, he said. Let's get you home. The ranch hands waiting by the wagon stared openly when Elias lifted Clara and the child into the front seat of his new Ford pickup like she was made of spun glass. Old Cookie, who had cooked for Elias since the old days, spat tobacco juice and muttered, Boss done. Lost his damn mind, but Elias didn't explain himself to anyone. He never had that first night. Clara waited for the price. Men always wanted payment. Instead, Elias showed her to the guest room with its own fireplace, laid a cradle by the hearth that he'd built himself years ago, and never had cause to use, and set a tray of warm milk and cornbread outside the door. Without a word, she cried herself to sleep, clutching Rose, expecting to be woken roughly in the dark. Morning came, soft sunlight on clean sheets, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting under the door. When she crept out, hair brushed with trembling fingers, wearing one of Ellen's old dresses that Elias had laid out, soft green wool that fit almost right, she found him at the kitchen table, sanding a tiny wooden horse for Rose. He said, not looking up. When she's bigger, Clara sneezed. Gave out, she sat hard on the floor and sobbed. Like someone who had forgotten it was allowed, Elias knelt awkward with his big hands. Hey now. Hey, you're safe. Both of you, long as I got breath. You're safe? She believed him the way drowning people believe in ropes. The first month was quiet and careful. Clara cooked like a woman trying to earn heaven. Biscuits light as clouds venison stew that made the hands cry into their bowls and pretend they had dust in their eyes. She mended shirts until her fingers bled, then kept mending. She planted winter kale in the cold frames and sang lullabies to Rose in a voice like warm honey. Elias watched from doorways. He saw how she spoke gently to the orphan barn cat, how she saved the burnt toast for herself and gave the perfect slices to the hands, how she stood on the porch every evening, watching the horizon as if waiting for the past to ride up and drag her back. One night in February, the temperature dropped so low, the stars looked sharp enough to cut the furnace in the big house. Coughed and died, Elias found Clara in the kitchen at 3:00 a.m., wrapped in every blanket she owned, feeding the cook stove scraps of kindling to keep Rose warm. He carried them both to his own room, the master room no one had entered since Ellen, and built a roaring fire. Then he slept in the chair, boots on gun across his lap, guarding their sleep like a dragon with treasure. Spring came sudden and fierce that year. The snow melted into rivers, the meadows turned violent green, and the wildflowers exploded like God had thrown paint across the prairie. Clara blossomed with them, her cheeks filled out. Her hair grew thick and shining. She laughed, sometimes small, startled sounds like a bird testing its wings. Rose learned to walk in the grass chasing butterflies, while Elias followed 3 steps behind, ready to catch her if she fell. One May evening, Clara was hanging laundry when the wind caught one of Elias's shirts and wrapped it around her like a lover. She stood there, face pressed into the sun-warmed cotton that smelled of him, leather horses, honest sweat safety, and realized she was happy. The feeling was so foreign it hurt. She found Elias later in the barn repairing a harness by lantern light. The words came out before courage failed. "I love you." He froze. The awl slipped and blood welled on his thumb. "I know I'm not," she started. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and kissed her, like a man who had waited half his life to breathe. When they broke apart, his voice was rough with tears. "Clara Hayes, I loved you the minute you stepped off that train, looking like the world had tried to break you and failed. I loved you when you were bones in terror and pride. Marry me for real this time. Not because some contract says so, because my heart won't beat right without you beside it." They were married in June under the cottonwood by the creek. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself from parachute silk. Elias had traded for years ago, and never used Rose carried a basket of wildflowers and scattered them with solemn delight. The ranch hands stood in their Sunday best hats, in hand eyes suspiciously bright. Cookie baked a cake tall enough to need its own zip code. That night, Elias carried his wife over the threshold of the master bedroom that was now theirs. Rose slept down the hall in the nursery painted sunshine yellow. Years rolled by like golden thunder. Clara turned the Thorn Ranch into something legendary. She started a school for the ranch children and the ones from town whose parents couldn't afford books. She took in 2 Mexican orphans after their parents died crossing the border, then a black teenager running from chain gangs in Mississippi, then a white girl pregnant at 15 with nowhere to go. The big house rang with voices and languages and hope. Elias built onto the house every time another child arrived. Another wing, another porch, another piece of his heart given away. People said Elias Thorne had gone soft. He just smiled and said, "Soft's just another word for finally brave enough to feel." One winter evening, 30 years after that frozen train platform, Elias and Clara sat on the wide porch, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies. Their Rose was grown now. Married to a good man, ran the school her mama started. Elias's hand gnarled but steady. Found Clarice the green wool dress she'd worn that first morning. Hung preserved in tissue paper upstairs. She could still fit it if she wanted, but she didn't need to prove anything anymore. "Still the most beautiful woman I ever saw," he murmured. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saw me when I was invisible. That's the kind of beautiful that never fades." Far off, a train whistle cried across the plains. Lonely, searching, but inside the circle of lamplight on that porch, 2 people who had once been broken sat whole and shining, proof that sometimes the greatest fortunes aren't found in the ground. They're found standing on a frozen platform in rags, holding everything that matters in their empty arms, waiting for someone brave enough to see. And if you ever doubt that kindness can change a life, remember Clara and Elias. Remember that love doesn't always arrive in silk and pearls. Sometimes it steps off a train in patched shoes, in a mother's desperate courage, and changes the world anyway.